And welcome everybody to the Minuteman University series of, what are we calling these things? Oops, it's got to turn off this music over here. Series of how to, can't think of the word, projects, starters. So we're talking about creating a two-way website today, and we're looking at the Minuteman University website. So if you go to skills, creating firearms content, and then creating a two-way website from the main menu up there, or on the side menu here, again under skills, creating a two-way website, that takes you to the page we're talking about today. When we're all done with this video, it'll be down here at the bottom of this page. And then if anybody has any questions about what we talk about today or anything on the web page, let us know through the comments in this video, to our email, gunwebsites@gmail.com, or over on Gun Channels. And we'll be happy to set up a time when we can get together with other experts and answer questions and address any issues you might have had, especially when we're talking Second Amendment websites. When we talk about guns, we get thrown in, unfortunately, with the violence or with other community things that put us in with the bad guys. And obviously, we're not the bad guys. So there are some strategies and some things that we need to be aware of, specifically to gun-related content online. But here, we're mainly going to do a quick run through of what it takes to create a website. And then, again, once you've got one built, we can talk about some of the more specific issues to a gun-related website. So we've got some basics. You've got a website like the one we're looking at here. It has a domain name. So in this case, minutemanuniversity.com. So that's the first step, is come up with the project. I guess I should have put the first step here is come up with a project. Once you've got that project in mind, come up with an appropriate domain name, and we'll do a chat with Clover, other web people, to talk about how to choose a good name. And again, this can be touchy with gun-related stuff. I had our store used to be called Gear Whore, and the whore part got blocked by a lot of businesses. Even now with gun websites or even gun channels, the gun part gets blocked by a lot of filters. So sometimes choosing a name like Full 30, that was a great choice because it's not going to be blocked by anyone. So that's something to be aware of. Sometimes when you're talking about monetizing or using ads later on to try to keep your website funded, you could encounter issues again with the gun terminology in there. So we'll do a whole chat on that. Then, of course, there's the technicalities of how to get one. But basically, what you're going to do when you're talking about getting a domain name is you're going to buy the name a year at a time. So if you want to and you have the money, you can buy it for 10 years out and you don't have to worry about it for 10 years, or you can buy it a year at a time. And it's usually going to cost you, under $10 a year. And if you buy it multiple years at a time, it could cost quite a bit less because you get kind of bulk rates. So buying the domain name, then you need to put it somewhere. So we figured out we wanted to make a website called Minuteman University for this project. We needed to put this website somewhere. So when you buy your domain name, after you pay for it, one of the questions, really the only question they're going to ask is, where do we point it? Where on the internet should we resolve this domain name to? So in other words, when someone types in minutemanuniversity.com in their browser, where is that going to go on the internet? And that's done through your domain hosting company. But what you do is you get web hosting, it's called. And that's a server, a computer that's set up and runs 24 hours a day. And it does nothing except run your website for you. Now, it might run thousands of websites, but what we're concerned about is it runs your website for you. So that's a hosting company. And we'll talk about some decisions there. But briefly, it's getting easier and easier to deal with hosting companies. So once you've got your domain name and you've bought your package at your hosting company, and again, that's going to be sometimes a monthly fee, or if you buy it a year at a time, it might be a little cheaper. So depending on how elaborate your project is and what kind of funding you have, once you've established your hosting, you'll point that domain name to your hosting. And now you're ready to go. So we've got our domain name. It's pointed to this computer that's set up. So how do we get these pages to show up? And that's what we're going to call, at least for this section, because there's different ways to talk about this. We're going to call it the website platform. So the decision there is, do you just start with a blank notepad and start to learn HTML and all the various codes that make up a web page? Or do we start with an established platform? I happen to be using one called WordPress, which is the most popular right now. And there's lots of other types of systems that you can use. Basically, the software that goes on that computer that you pay for. So your domain name points to a server, and that server runs software, and that software is your website. So you could think of it as your laptop runs Windows so that you can use it. Without the Windows, you just have a computer. So without the platform there, without the software that actually runs the website, you would just have a computer sitting there. So now you've got the three elements. You got the name, you've got a place to point it, and then you've got something to happen there. And we've done a couple of videos on this before, but we'll do more on designing your website, setting it up depending on what platform you use to start with. There's lots of tutorials out there on setting it all up. You decide what you want it to look like overall, and you start. It's like any project, you just start in on it. So that's the next step, filling your website with your content. So once you've given it a look, a structure, and a page file system here, an organization, then you start to fill it with content. And literally that's what we're doing right now. So if you look on Minuteman University, there's a heck of a lot of these pages that aren't really, there's not much there. It's some general notes for us to do these videos. So we're in the process of this step, filling the website with your content. Then you want to have a plan. I probably should have put something up here about planning as well. But once you've got your website built, now what are you going to do with it? So that's a good time to start a plan. The next step, kind of in conjunction with that, is learning more details. There's infinitely lots of stuff to learn with websites, like everything. With a little bit of savvy and a little bit of knowledge, you'll end up learning what's useful to learn and what's the minutia. So that's part of learning the details of the website. And then the most important part probably of all, the reason you put a website up there is so that you can share that information. So learning then to share and network effectively and efficiently is a real big part. And I think it's one of the funner parts. It's a lot of fun to come up with a domain name, and it's pretty simple to put it together and set it up. It's a heck of a lot of fun designing them, especially once you have a couple of websites. But even with one, it's fun to design them. You can redesign them. And then filling them up is what it's all about, right? It's the path. It's the journey. The journey is the not the destination. The journey is the adventure. So it's very rarely do you have a project that is going to have a website that's this big, and once you build it, you're done. Most of the time, you're starting an adventure with your website and like a long project. So adding the content is the real meat of it all. And then depending on how interested you are in these specifics or the details, some people really thrive on learning all the minutia to how to get your website to perform well. And that's what we'll talk about again in future videos. We have some advanced topics here to talk about. The high price of free. There's lots of stuff to talk about there, but like anything, you get what you pay for. Getting your site noticed, that's important because we're all out there doing our thing. How do we get attention? One of the ways to answer that, and another big portion of a website, is making it searchable. There's lots of stuff to talk about there to make your website useful so that you go through a bunch of effort to get it noticed. You want it to be found. In other words, if you just wave a bunch of people over with garage sale signs, but you don't put a garage sale sign up in front of your house, you might have put all that effort pulling people off the main road and send them 3 houses down where they do have a good sign at their driveway. And now you've just effectively advertised for your competitor. And that happens a lot on the internet. So lots and lots of stuff to talk about there. We can get into more specifics like news feeds, which comes in real handy when we're talking about podcasting and other content that gets made on a regular basis, and the power of a news feed, being able to distribute your information from your home base, your website, out to the rest of the world. These temporary entities like social media platforms. Remember AOL? Remember MySpace? You would have asked somebody right in the heyday, or right even at the end of AOL or MySpace, if they're going to be around forever, and they would have said, fill in the blank is the internet. People thought AOL was the internet. People thought MySpace was the internet. People think right now that Facebook is the internet. We're living in times where there's no there's no precedence for Facebook being as large as it is. So as large as it is and as fast as it grew, there's no reason to believe that it isn't going to fall apart in 2 days. Not in 2 days from now, but it could take 2 days to crumble completely whenever that happens. It simply takes people turning off their accounts. They lose all their income and they're gone. So the platforms might be useful for us, but if we're really creating presence, if we're really trying to get a message across that wants to be permanent, then a website allows you to keep that because you're in control of it being on the internet, and use those platforms to help yourself, to leverage. And that's, again, it's either fun or labor once you get into your website. We'll talk about creating a blog, which could be useful. We'll get in a little bit into codes, not so much because you need to use them, but to help you distinguish if you have specific questions out there. Maybe you need a project that needs some kind of code work done. We'll be happy to help people find the resources needed if there actually is code work done. But ideally, we'll help you figure out ways around it that you don't need to roll up your sleeves and get into the code stuff. Just like automobiles, very rare that you need to actually go in and pull your valve cover or something. Most of the time you can keep good preventative maintenance, and you can use alternative ways to not need to dig into code. We'll talk a little bit about databases. which is part of the web hosting and some of the powerful stuff like news feeds and stuff. And then building content management systems. That's a fancy word for kind of do-it-yourself websites that are kind of automatic as opposed to stick shift. So they happen a little easier than other websites. WordPress is a content management system. Gun Channels is a content management system. So it's that format versus just a banner website that you might see trying to sell you something and scroll down to the bottom and you click on a link. That would be a more static website. Lastly, making money. It's a big part of most projects, trying to keep them funded unless you're independently wealthy. That's an issue for most of us. So we'll talk about things like setting up an online store. If you have products, we'll talk about affiliate systems where you recommend products that other people are selling and you get a little cut. Things like Amazon and some of the other affiliate systems like Brownells. We'll talk about Google AdSense, which is a whole nother way to run advertisements or banners, I guess, on your website that could potentially bring in money. But again, in the Second Amendment area, we'll have actual some strategies and stuff because we do get banned from AdSense pretty quick with firearm stuff. Lastly, website sponsors is another great way to go into, one-to-one with someone, maybe a local gun shop or a holster manufacturer or somebody who's looking for views and looking for links. And it doesn't have a lot of spend, but most website projects don't cost very much. So a lot of times, an in-person website sponsor is the way to go for a lot of projects. And then lastly, we'll talk about credit card stuff because that could be a big issue too, technically. So that was the brief overview of creating a website specifically for the Second Amendment community. We'll post this video over on Minuteman University. And again, whenever there's enough concern or questions, we'll do a longer session over with Gun Channels with some of the people who have the questions or people that have the answers. And then we'll post those long sessions on this webpage as well. So thanks everybody for watching, and stay tuned for more in this series. We do one of these about every 3 days, trying to encourage people to use your voice on the internet. If you're just watching what other people are doing out there, you're the audience. And unlike back in the day when we would watch TV or read the newspaper and your role as audience was just to absorb the information, you're actually the product now. So when you're on a Facebook, when you're on a YouTube, when you're on pretty much any website that's large like that, you're providing data that they sell to other companies. So you acknowledge that when you fill out the terms of service and we all deal with it. However, you're not destined to do that. You have the ability to use those platforms and to influence what gets preferential treatment out there, what's preferred. All that is due to the user base. So we try to let people know that you have the power out there on the internet. We can influence decision making out there, especially when Second Amendment people work as a team. So hopefully with these videos, we'll inspire people to get out there and put your own content out on the internet. Every individual person has the potential to change one or two minds, and together as a group, we'll have much better opportunity than relying on an organization where we just throw them $30 a year and expect them to do the work for us. So hopefully there's people out there that are interested in this stuff. Let us know in the comments what questions you might have. We'll be happy to address them, and we'll continue this project as long as there's interest. Thanks, everybody.